Good evening. My name is Marco Navarro, and I am the Executive Vice President of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. It is my pleasure to welcome you this evening to our second annual Georgiana Freedom Award Gala. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate Georgiana's and our award recipient, Christie Blatchford. I can see that a lot of that energy from last night still pent up in some of you. I am fairly new to this job, but not new to the movement. In retrospect, speaking of movement, I've been in the movement probably since I was 14, when the Sandinista thugs ran me and my family out of Nicaragua in 1979. So what am I doing here? Well, I'm not a lawyer. No one's perfect. But people ask me all the time, what is it like to work with a bunch of lawyers? And I gotta tell you, I'm a pretty fortunate guy. People have funny ideas about lawyers in our culture. But I can tell you that the lawyers I work with wear capes and are real heroes. So it is a pleasure to be here tonight. I would like to acknowledge tonight the presence of a few people. Maya Jonas, Barbara Kay, Christy Mason, Jonathan Allen, Alan Horner, Bruce Party, Tom Bateman, all members of our board of directors from various parts of the country. My colleague Lindsay Shepard, who has recently joined the Justice Center, is here tonight as well. And Marie Henein, who is going to introduce our award recipient, Christie Blatchford, is here as well. I would also like to thank our generous sponsor, generous, I should say, and faithful, the National Post. And Dr. Roy sponsored the students this year, so please, thank you. Thank you all for being here, and now one of our esteemed board members, Barbara Kay, is going to make her way up here. Where is Barbara?
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm very honored to be a part of this great institution and the great work that they do. I do think justice is a part of living well in the world, and I think the other absolutely necessary thing one has to have to live well is gratitude. So we give thanks for the food we are about to receive. We give thanks for friends and family, and we give thanks for the liberties that we continue to enjoy mostly, and that we wish and that we hope to continue to enjoy in the future. Thank you so much.
The chairman of the board of directors, Bruce Hassel, QC.
Thanks, Marco. It was actually fine. I was happy to be skipped over, but I won't take up too much of your time, and please feel free to eat your salad. We've said grace. I'm a lawyer, but I don't wear a cape. I'm not one of the Justice Center's Cape Crusaders. I'm a humble commercial lawyer for Victoria who occasionally goes into court on a tax-related matter. But I'm thrilled to have been a part of the evolution of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms and its amazing growth in the last few years. And I'm thrilled to welcome you all officially to this event, and thank you for being here. You know, some Canadians think that we trace our rights and freedoms back to the Charter in 1982. Of course, they go back, our rights and freedoms go back to ancient times through the common law. the rights to peaceful assembly, free association, equality before the law, and freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression. These were not controversial things in 1982 when they were included in the Charter, and yet in the almost 40 years since that time, we have seen them erode. Fashionable causes have led governments, administrative tribunals, and sometimes even courts to decide that these rights are not as important as other things. Of course, for most of the years that we've had the Charter, there have been lots of legal advocacy groups intervening in court cases, but none of them on the side of freedom. And if you push hard enough on a wall, it will eventually fall down. And until John Carpe started the Justice Center, there was nobody pushing on the other side of those walls. There was nobody holding up our freedoms. And in the few years since 2010, in just 9 years, this organization has gone from one person's idea to a firm of 6 lawyers, 7 staff members, and dozens of other lawyers who volunteer and assist with cases and opinions across this country. We are starting to have an impact. We are starting to have measurable change on the law of Canada, and it is so important that people like you come out to support this and allow the Justice Centre to do its work. And it is so important that we recognize people outside of the courts who are doing this work, such as journalists like Christie Blatchford, who we honor tonight. The Justice Centre has finally created an opportunity for courts in Canada to hear arguments about freedom and personal choice, arguments which nobody made to them in the first 30 years of the Charter's existence. We are rebalancing the system. We are proud to do so, and we're proud to be growing so quickly, and I thank you for being a part of that journey.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. What a wonderful evening to be together and to celebrate the legacy of George Jonas and our Canadian legacy of freedom. George Jonas spoke with authority on the subject of freedom because he had personally lived under a Nazi regime, or a Nazi sympathetic regime, a fascist, anti-Semitic regime. He had also lived under communism. So when George Jonas wrote about freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of peaceful assembly, the right of parents to educate their own children as they see fit, not as the state directs. These are the fundamental freedoms on which Canada is built. And George saw things. He was a prophet. He saw things decades ahead of time. When the human rights legislation came in the 1960s, George Jonas warned that notwithstanding the good motivations, the good intentions, this is going to lead to abuse. The Justice Centre currently, we are representing 2 women in British Columbia who have been hauled before the BC Human Rights Tribunal for refusing to provide a Brazilian bikini wax to a trans woman with male genitalia who approached them and wanted the Brazilian bikini wax. Now, for those of you who don't know what a Brazilian bikini wax is, Mark Stein spoke last year, and Mark Stein said, and I quote, if you don't know and you want to know, come and see me after the event in the parking lot and I'll provide one for you. For those of you who are curious about last year's event, it is posted on our website, www.jccf.ca. You can see the whole evening, and the last section of it is Mark Stein's fantastic speech. So if you want to get a 2-for-1 and get a last year's presentation, just visit our website.
Political correctness in Canada has gone too far, and the Justice Centre is fighting back. I am immensely grateful, profoundly grateful, to the more than 5,000 Canadians from coast to coast who are supporting us financially. 100% of our support comes from voluntary donations. We do not ask for or receive any government funding. So some people are giving us $100 a year, some people are giving us $1,000 a year, some people are giving us $10,000 a year, and no amount is too small. And this is a fundraising dinner, so please consider, if you're not already a donor, tonight is your night to sign up. There are forms on the table that Marco alluded to, and there's also a feedback survey on the dinner. So whether you're donating or not, fill out that survey. We want the feedback to create an excellent event. And you can mark down in your calendars June 15th, 2020 for the third George Jonas Freedom Award dinner, and put that into your calendar already. I'm very grateful to all of our sponsors, to the people that have purchased tables, and to the National Post, and to my staff, Marco and Jordan and Michael Kennedy. Jordan and Michael are not here tonight, but there's been a lot of hard work that's put into this, so let's hear it for the Justice Centre staff. Another important thing is that, freedom can be enshrined in a constitution, but ultimately, what the free society depends on is that our fundamental freedoms be enshrined in our hearts and in our minds. And to that effect, in addition to our court cases, the Justice Centre also publishes papers and reports and studies. Our litigation manager, Jay Cameron, has appeared before parliamentary committees many times. Most recently, the Justice Committee that is studying online hate, and so Jay Cameron was testifying there. And also, and to that end, please also sign up for our newsletter, which is on the very same form. If you're not getting our Justice Update twice per month, you should sign up for it tonight. Not only is it the most interesting newsletter that you will ever read, but the great thing is it's sent out only twice a month, so you're not going to be bombarded on a daily basis. Freedom is under serious attack in Canada today. It was 12 months ago, almost to the day, that the Supreme Court of Canada trampled into the ground the fundamental charter freedoms of association, expression, religion of Trinity Western University. And they did so in the name of diversity, which is not a legal term, it's a political term, and they didn't bother to define that term. And they trampled our fundamental charter freedoms into the ground in the name of equity. Again, a term that they did not bother to define. So we have an uphill battle in Canada. I'm often asked, what does the future hold? What's the next 5 or 10 years going to look like? And I don't know, but I have a two-part answer. The short term, I think, is not going to be very good. The next 5 years, maybe 10, I'm not that confident that we're going to get into better shape when it comes to our fundamental freedoms. However, nobody can predict what's going to happen 10 years from now. And the importance of the work that the Justice Centre is doing, and that many of you in this room are doing, and I'll allude to that momentarily, it's the work that we're doing today when, in many ways, times are bleak. I could go on and on. I could talk for hours about how bad things are in Canada on many different fronts. Times are bleak, but it's that planting seeds and watering seeds is going on right now. It's the work that's going on right now that is really going to pay dividends 10 years from now. because I can predict with some degree of confidence, I think things might get worse in the next 5 or 10 years, but 10, 20, 30 years from now, nobody knows, nobody can predict. And it's what we're doing today that makes that difference for the long-term future. I don't have time to get into all the Justice Centre cases, but we do have an annual report on 2018. Please take one on your way out, and you can read up on our cases. One of the enemies of the free society is this growing and pervasive political correctness. We're all familiar with it. We've seen it. Our 2019 award recipient has been on the receiving end of attacks through this. But it's one thing when we have political correctness permeating our culture, and you can fight those cultural battles, but it's not really something that the Justice Centre can look after. It's quite another thing when government starts to impose political correctness. How many people remember the Bars case, Derek and Frances Bars, the Easter Bunny case? Yeah. So here we had a politically correct social worker that took away 2 young girls, at that time ages 3 and 4, very vulnerable girls that were temporarily placed with Derek and Frances, a loving couple to look after them. And the social worker insisted that Derek and Frances tell the girls in their care that the Easter Bunny is real. And because of their personal religious convictions, they said, no, we're going to have an Easter egg hunt, but we're going to say that we're the ones that hid the eggs. And we're not going to proactively tell them that the Easter Bunny is not real. But if push comes to shove, if we get asked if the Easter Bunny is real, our honest, truthful answer is going to be no. And on account of this, the social worker, supported by her superiors of the Hamilton Children's Aid Society, removed these vulnerable girls who had already been through so much, who'd been there and been very well placed in that environment for several months, ripped them out on 24 hours notice, and just because this couple would not tell the young girls in their care that the Easter Bunny is real. So the Justice Centre took the Hamilton Children's Aid Society to court. We sued them. We won. We got a court declaration that the rights of Derek and Frances have been violated. That is the kind of work that we do, because the threat to freedom today does not come from, the Prime Minister saying that he wants to wage war on his neighbors because they're populated by inferior people. That's not the context today. Today, the attacks against our freedoms are insidious, and they are brought against us in the names of equity, diversity, inclusion. Exhibit number 1, the Law Society of Ontario, mandated that lawyers in Ontario, as a condition of practicing law, in order to practice law in Ontario, you have to tick off a box saying that you're going to, I don't have the exact wording, but promote or actively work towards diversity, inclusion, and equity. And properly defined, these could be things that all of us could agree with. I could agree with all 3, properly defined. But they're not defined. But even if they were properly defined, I'm going to quote Bruce Pardy, Queen's University law professor, also on our board of directors. Hey, Bruce. There's a line from one of his fantastic columns, and he said, "A law that required us to say please and thank you and hello and goodbye would be a bad law, not because these are bad words, but because the state is requiring us to say them." And that's the problem with the... It's easy to talk about problems, it's easy to complain about problems, it's harder to roll up our sleeves and go to work. The way to defend the free society, the solution is simple and hard. Not simple and easy, simple and hard. To defend the free society, the solution is simple. You continue to speak truth. You speak your beliefs. You speak your opinion. You do not allow yourself to be intimidated by the Twitter mob. You do not cave into this coercion and pressure to agree to things that you don't agree with. You put up resistance, real resistance. It's simple. And it's also very hard. When the Law Society of Ontario came down with its, and I'll use the word deliberately, totalitarian edict that henceforth a government body would tell lawyers that they have to say that they agree with diversity, equity, and inclusion, the easy thing to do would have been to complain. You know, we all complain. I do it myself too. And whine and get into self-pity and, oh, how terrible that all these oppressive powers are, imposing all this stuff on us, and just get into this, victimhood and self-pitying syndrome. But there are a number of very courageous people that rolled up their sleeves and got to work, and they fought, and they spoke very openly, very publicly about what is wrong with this attestation, and why is this. It's not about lawyers. It's not just an attack on lawyers. Okay, this is akin to, you've got to tick off a box saying that you agree with Justin Trudeau's opinions on abortion in order to get access to a federal program, the Canada Summer Jobs Program. It would be akin to a Prime Minister declaring that in order to get your Canada pension check, you need to tick off a box saying that you agree that Israel is the best country in the Middle East. And the point is not, are those statements true or false? The point is the state is engaging in ideological coercion. So when those people took on the Law Society of Ontario, they were actually fighting for the freedom of every single Ontarian and every single Canadian. And they worked hard. They were subjected to all kinds of insults and name-calling and the usual Twitter mob, and you're racist and you're anti-gay and you're homophobic and you're this and you're that, and shame on you. And they withstood these attacks very courageously. They rolled up their sleeves, they got to work, they did something and not just complain. These newly elected benchers to the Law Society, and there are, I think, about 20 of them that are present with us tonight. I would like all 20 to stand up. And the campaign team, and remain standing. Thank you. These people are heroes. It's because of these people and others like them. And there are other people in this room doing all kinds of good work. I don't have the time. There's so many people I would like to, I was looking at the guest list, so many people I would like to honor and recognize for the good things that they're doing to fight for the free society. And I say fight on purpose. The biggest danger is to think that we are not in a state of war to defend the free society from being destroyed and undermined from within by well-intentioned people with very bad ideas. So we are in a fight. It takes courage. And you might not be a lawyer in Ontario. Most of us here are not lawyers. But the point is, emulate their example. These people rolled up their sleeves and got to work and fought. And so they are an example that whatever your sphere of life, whatever you're involved in, whatever you're engaged in, this is the type of action that will save the free society and prevent it from imploding. So, again, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here tonight. And we're now going to, what are we doing next? We're seeing a video. We're seeing a video that I'm told is very good. I haven't seen it. And this is a tribute to Christie Blatchford. Let's hear it for Christie Blatchford. I don't want to steal Marie Henein's thunder and go on and on about Christie, but suffice it to say that I'm a huge admirer of Christie Blatchford because she is a friend of this free society, because she has courage and because she speaks truth. So again, thank you.
I think she's unique.
Tenacious.
Relentless.
Honest. She's been a must-read for decades.
Gutsy.
A whirling dervish of positive energy.
I think she's a national treasure.
I would have no hesitation in describing Christie Blatchford as a great journalist. She's honest, she's fair. Fake news is not on her horizon. She's accurate. I never, in the years I worked with her, there was never a complaint that I can recall about her accuracy and her fairness. And yet she was tough and she pulled no punches.
Great journalists are never satisfied with the party line or the police line. They dig for the story behind the story.
She has great respect for our military. I think that comes across, and has helped Canadians be prouder of what Canada does on the world stage.
I think she's unique in the way that she combines courage, independence, and her ability to tell that in terms of stories of real people rather than abstract discussion of issues. We have many good writers in Canada, but I don't know that there's another one like has Christie's combination of talents.
Well, the first impression you have as a reader is the ability to capture complex stories, long, difficult stories in simple language, and communicate the emotional experience of the participants in the events.
It's just a great honor to sit next to Christy because, you know, you want to talk about tenacity. What people see, what the general reader sees, is a tremendous writer who is capable of pulling together a lot of complex information. But what they don't see is the tenacity with which Christy goes after that information.
Christie's written about cases where, for example, the Mark Norman case, where there was a concerted effort by politicians to deny the defense team of Mark Norman what they were entitled to, which was the disclosure of evidence. And she explained it to the public. This was something that subverts the course of justice. And she clearly illustrated to the public the importance of that information, and in the end resulted in the withdrawal of those charges. I think her coverage of the trials involving Mahaffey, the murders of Mahaffey and French, she really captured a very difficult series of events. And for the reader, it was an extraordinary experience how she put you in the courtroom, portrayed the anxiety of all the participants, the families of the murder victims, and the difficulties that the whole problem of that crime, that horrible, horrible crime, posed to our society and the participants in the prosecution process.
One thing that stands out in my mind, and I think about it often, to be honest, is when she was sent to Thunder Bay to cover the announcement and the fallout from Terry Fox having to quit his Marathon of Hope. And so the Star in those days, and as most newspapers, had lots of money, and we chartered a plane and off Christy went. And the lead, the beginning of her story, the next day was, he gave us a dream as big as our country. And I mean, I think people were totally moved by it in a newsroom, and also readers. And as I say, I remember that lead, that beginning of that story to this day, and I can still feel pretty emotional about it.
Her book on Caledonia. This was a time when both the provincial government and the federal government had failed in their responsibility to protect Canadians and their rights and to maintain civil order. And Christy was the only one, really, at the time, who had the courage to take this on.
Christie's work has exposed the failures of the child protection system in cases such as Sarah Podnowitz and Jeffrey Baldwin. And her work has exposed the weaknesses and shortcomings of these organizations, and they are not the only ones who can protect the vulnerable in our society.
And I think these are the qualities that we see are so important in the high quality media personalities that Christy is part of and represents.
Despite the fact that she's heard some of the most traumatic testimony, which often hardens people, calluses them to terrible suffering that you hear in courts, she's never lost her sensitivity.
We were covering the 2002 Summer Olympics in Athens, and Christy absolutely loves dogs and animals, but dogs. And so, you know, and there's a lot of stray dogs in Athens. And so it's so much fun. And Christy walked around in her backpack with dog treats and actually canned dog food to give to dogs she met on the road.
No stranger to excellence and tenacity, she has risen to prominent spot among defense lawyers in this country. Born in Egypt, migrated to Canada with her parents at a young age and studied law at Oxford and obtained her master's at Columbia. I have a very long bio, and I am, in the interest of time, gonna cut through half of it. But we all know about Marie, and we know about her involvement in some pretty heavy-duty cases, including, of course, recently the case of Admiral Norman. So without further ado, and in the interest of time, Marie, I'm going to call you up. Please welcome Marie Henein.
Thank you. I am often invited to speak on panels that are usually designed by lawyers entitled, "How do you manage the press?" And when I'm asked, my answer is always the same. Have you met Christy? How do you manage Christy? You don't. Christy is wholly and deliciously unmanageable. And I am here today solely to honor her. The George Jonas Freedom Award is perfectly named because George Jonas believed, and this award recognizes, that at the heart of our fundamental freedoms in this democracy is an unmanageable, and I like to prefer to call it free, press. So why would you ever want to have any discussion at all about how you manage the press? I know how the press has been managed historically by autocrats and despots. They have been delegitimized, called fake news, called the enemies of the people. And countries including the United States, Canada, Finland, Uruguay, Chile, Poland, Israel, and Germany very recently all have attempted to constrain the press, undermine whistleblowers, and even put them under surveillance. Can you actually imagine a journalist in any country being spied on by the police? Well, you don't have to imagine it. It happened in this country, in Canada, in Quebec. Can you imagine having a policy to search journalists as they cross their border to search their network activity? Well, you don't have to imagine, because it happens in the United States at their borders all the time. The crime that is leveled against all of these press people is precisely that they are unmanageable. Isn't the critical need for our society now more than ever a media that is utterly unmanageable, that cannot be spun, cannot be bought, cannot be toned down, cannot be inflamed? A media that independently, like Christy, comes to their own conclusions? Don't we need more unmanageable press? Don't we need more of Christy who refuses to be managed or fed lines, who is independent thinking and prepared to bear the arrows and the danger that comes with inflaming those who seek to manage you? or even disagree with you. It's for that reason that I am so honored to be introducing your honoree tonight. She is fearless, she is unapologetic, she is principally unmanageable. When Dorothy Parker wrote, "The first thing I do in the morning is brush my teeth and sharpen my tongue," I swear she must have been talking about Christy. How critical is Christy's sight for us in these times? When the real story is often so effectively obscured or drowned out by social media, where opinions and journalism has been so democratized now that anyone sitting anywhere can tweet or post or create waves of dissonance or unrest driven entirely by misinformation. How critical is her job when it has become near impossible to sift through what is and is not real? Where do you go to find out what is real? To Christy. To do any of that, just one part of it, requires a willingness to withstand criticism, a tough skin, a fundamental, unwavering belief that a free press is one of the central things that keeps us on a democratic course. And I can think of no person more befitting this description, who has spent her life resisting, challenging, provoking, refusing to toe any line, than Christy. What a fitting recipient Christy is to George Jonas's legacy. I guess I could tell you at this point the obligatory story of Christy's quirkiness, or her dog obsession, or her directional ineptitude that is matched only by my own. But the thing about Christy is she ain't one for cute stories, and neither am I. So this is what I need you to know about her today. She is an extraordinary and relentless journalist, and for that, she won the National Newspaper Award. She is the author of numerous best-selling books reflecting a wide range of interests and engagements with our world, covering the Afghanistan War with humanity in 15 days, for which she won the Governor General's Literary Award in 2008, to writing about her 4 decades in the courts in life sentence. But I want to tell you a little bit about what I have come to see of her, learn of her, as we have been in the same court now together for decades, because that's the Christy that I really know best. She is the first journalist in court. She is always at the front seat. She will travel anywhere in this country at great personal cost to shine a light on something that she feels the public needs to see in our justice system, when so often it is much easier to avert our eyes. And let me be clear that the work that she does in those courts day in and day out takes a profound emotional toll. She does not work in a lighthearted atmosphere. It is full of suffering and pain, humanity at its worst and at its best, and it is impossible, it is absolutely impossible to be there for 4 decades and not have that seep into your pores, not sometimes to be felled by it, or at least left in a fog. But the amazing thing is Christy sees all of us through that fog. The police that are in the court, the victims, the accused, the lawyers, the judges, she sees us all. Christy, in her relentless writing about cases, has and continues to provide the Canadian public with a critical, informed, and reasoned view of our justice system. She values it. She knows its worth because no one spends 4 decades of their life on something that they think is worthless. And she's unapologetic and uncowed throughout all of it. She does not seek to write the most popular view. She curries favor with no one, and yet everyone is so desperate to be in her good graces. None of it is sugar-coated, and why should it be? In these times more than ever, don't we need a good dose of unvarnished truth? Don't we need a good dose of Christy? And this is the most striking and moving thing to me about her. In her extraordinary book, Life Sentence, a book that starts with the premise that it is designed to explain why she fell out of love with the Canadian justice system. This is how she concludes. I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. I don't believe sentences are too light. I don't want to see more people in prison. I don't think government needs to make prison more cruel. No one ever understands the absolutely frightening power of the state until it is brought against her. And then she describes this scene in court. There, prisoners in jumpsuits and handcuffs, accused people seeking bail, distraught relatives and families, and lawyers and judges walk the same halls, sometimes side by side, which is only right, and a testament to the genuinely egalitarian beast that a modern justice system should strive to be. I love the place, and I'm so glad it was there that I rediscovered what I so admire about the rule of law, that it is the antithesis of vengeance. This alone is reason enough to keep the system and make it better. What extraordinary words. While she is tough as nails, that really is Christy. That is her profound importance to all of us Canadians. There is a humanity in her writing that runs right through it. She never loses sight of the fact that our justice system is a system of real people, and that is painfully human with all the good and the bad that comes with our own humanity. And the amazing thing is that Christy has an ability to capture that humanity, that human moment in any courtroom, any cross-examination, and crystallize the essence of the thing. It is her perspective. It is her ability to see through and see the entirety of the court that is so special. And while lawyers and judges may rail against what she writes sometimes, may get infuriated even, here's our dirty little secret. I'm going to share it with you. They all get nervous when she walks into court. We know she is there. And everyone, every single one of them, every judge and every lawyer reads her first. And they do it for one reason. Her opinion matters. Her perspective matters. I want to share just one personal story. I worked with Eddie Greenspan for many years, and over my years with him and when I left, he was tough. He did not give praise lightly. There was no going away gift. In fact, he never gave me a single gift my entire life, except for one. One day, after I had started my own office, he called me over to say that he had a present for me. I went, sat in front of him, and he pulled out a picture frame. It was a framed article of a piece that Christy had written about a case I was doing. And in it, she had called me formidable. Eddie had highlighted that sentence. And as he presented the framed article to me, he said, "If Christy says that about you, well, that is something, Marie." What an extraordinary thing, Christy, to matter, to have your opinion, your views, your voice be so persuasive to Canadians. You are unequivocally an eloquent barometer of what many of us are thinking, and better still, what many of us should be thinking about our legal system. For that, I am forever grateful. Your contribution is invaluable. And so, on behalf of my trans, gay, diverse friends and yours, thank you for your contribution. Your bravery is admired and cherished by me and all of us. And I can think of no person more fitting for this award than this year's recipient, Christie Blatchford.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you, John. And thank you, Marie. Am I yelling? Okay, good. This has been an entirely mortifying night, just so you know. And I have to say, as honored as I am about the award, I really only got excited about it when I heard that Marie was going to introduce me. After all the court cases of hers that I've covered, I know her pretty well by now, and yet, pathetically, my very first thought was, holy crap, Marie Henein. Okay, now am I yelling? All right, I have to keep reminding myself that she's human. What I do, and Marie made reference to this, is to think back to the time that we ended up at the same law conference in Montebello, Quebec. and Marie kindly offered me a drive back to the airport in Montreal. She'd rented a state-of-the-art giant black SUV, which had a GPS and various other map and navigational tools. She may have thought I was reasonably capable. Well, I showed her I was completely useless, and together we managed to get lost 4 times in what was meant to be an hour-long drive. So don't go thinking she's perfect just because in every way that really matters she is. I'd also like to thank Bruce, oh great, now I've developed a list, good. Bruce Halser, the chair of the board of the Justice Center, and of course President John Carpe and the staff of the JCCF, particularly the lawyers who do the spade work. Thanks too to the National Post, which lets writers like me write even when it's clear to the pointy heads that we're wrong. And to my boss, who is here tonight, I'd ask her to stand, but like many great editors, she's genuinely shy, so I'll just say thank you, Joanne. Sitting next to her is my former boss, who I don't think is quite so shy, so thank you, Rob. It will not surprise some of you that I'm a bit of a handful to manage, so know that Joanne and Rob before her have a lot of patience and a long fuse. I'd also like to thank my friends Andrea, Maurizio, Karen, and John for coming, and Sam Pisano, who I bullied into being my date, sort of. Of course, being Sam, he then tried to bring along another better date. For those of you who may not know Sam, he is the longtime court reporter for the Toronto Sun. He's a ferocious journalist and an irritatingly good competitor. For instance, just last year, I had an exclusive story all lined up. I'd worked on it for about 2 weeks. I couldn't write it, however, until the lawyer filed the actual documents in court in Hamilton. I asked the lawyer to file them late in the day so no other reporter could get at them. He had a clerk file them just before 4:30 p.m. on a Friday, by which time, if you know court clerks, just about all of them have already gone home. Guess who was there, waiting for the paper? Pisano. He wrote the story that day, beating me at my own exclusive. I never did write the story. And I found out when I read The Sun Saturday morning. Sam knows the main Toronto courthouse at 361 University and all the people who work there better than anyone else in the world. He's a veritable glad-handing, flirting, hi, how you doing kind of machine. I always say that walking through 361 with Sam is what it must have been like to walk through Vegas with Sinatra. It's of course a great privilege to win anything named after George Jonas. Though we were colleagues twice, first at the Toronto Sun and then at the Post, I didn't know him well. I'm a hack, the furthest thing from an intellectual. And intellectuals like George, Conrad Black, Ken White, Rex Murphy, Mark Stein, and Barbara Emile, even though I worked for her for years when she was the Sun editor, intimidate the hell out of me. However, I do recognize a babe when I see one, and George, in my eyes, was always a babe. A motorcyclist and a poet and a pilot, for God's sakes, all that sexy black leather for just one man. I'm smart enough to have admired George, too. Virtually everything he wrote, and particularly his visceral appreciation of freedom, born of that period in his life in his native Hungary when he didn't have any. I also admired his taste in friends, notably the late Eddie Greenspan, with whom he collaborated on the Scales of Justice television show, and Emile. I'm grateful for knowing most of George's wives, the pneumatic Emile and the lovely Maya, who is here tonight, and you saw her. By the way, I was invited to one of Emile's weddings, the wrong one, as I like to say. She was marrying number 3, I think, the cable guy, David Graham, and the posh party was at the top floor of the old Sutton Place Hotel. As I know you can tell, black tie and dressing up isn't my thing. I live in jeans and t-shirts. But then I found a dress somewhere, and my former husband and I, he was my number 2, arrived at the hotel. I was nervous and damp, and to be frank, fairly porcine in those days, and promptly burst the zipper on my dress, which meant I had to safety pin myself back into it in the bathroom, and emerged hot, crabby, and dripping with sweat. I am grateful and terrified to follow in the steps of Mark Stein, who won this award last year. As John Carpe helpfully told me when he said I'd won and would have to sing for my supper, speak for 30 minutes or longer if you like. Mark went on for 60 minutes last year. Regrettably, I ain't no Mark Stein. Not elegant, not brilliant, not laugh out loud witty, not dressed as well. I will not be speaking for an hour. I find it amusing that we're here celebrating freedom at a time when the Federal Justice Committee unanimously has agreed to rewrite recent history. As you'll know, in the last week of May, Conservative MP Michael Cooper dared to quote 3 lines from New Zealand terrorist Brenton Tarrant's dreary manifesto, this in response to a bit of a hectoring from a Muslim witness who appeared before the committee, which was studying and still is studying, I think, online hate. The witness was Faisal Khan Suri, the president of the Alberta Muslim Public Affairs Council, and among the things he said was this: we've seen a lot of recent tragedies happen across the world. In January 2017, the Quebec City mosque killer, Alexandre Bissonnette, gunned down 6 Muslim men in execution style when he came into the mosque with 2 guns and fired more than 800 rounds. The evidence from Bissonnette's computer showed he repetitively sought content about anti-immigrant, alt-right, and conservative commentators, mass murderers, US President Donald Trump, and the arrival of Muslim immigrants in Quebec. Suri then went on, as did many other speakers, to mention the March 2019 terrorist attack in Christchurch, where 51 Muslims were murdered. After another speaker, Cooper, who is not my favorite guy, by the way, told Suri that he took great umbrage with his efforts to link conservatism with violent and extremist attacks, and that he should be ashamed. Then he read into the record 3 lines from Tarrant's 74-page manifesto, in which Tarrant said, quote, "Conservatism is corporatism in disguise. I want no part of it." And that the nation whose values most aligned with his own was the People's Republic of China. To judge by the reaction of his fellow committee members, you'd have thought Cooper had just taken an enormous dump on the desk. I agree he probably overreacted to a pretty mild comment, but he's a conservative and they tend to take such things seriously. Liberal and NDP members sputtering with fury, the committee immediately went in camera. When they emerged, Cooper withdrew, having said that Suri should be ashamed, and the hearing proceeded. And this is all fine as far as it goes. But a week later, the committee adopted a motion condemning Cooper for having been discriminatory, hurtful, and disrespectful to Suri, noted that he'd read from the Christchurch attackers' manifesto, though hardly with approval, and resolved to expunge the attacker's name and the 3 lines Cooper had quoted from the manifesto. The Toronto Manifesto is banned in New Zealand, which is ridiculous, I think, part of the "we must deny agency and infamy" rationale, which now sees even mainstream media sometimes refuse to name mass killers. How can you know a thing if you're not allowed to put a name to it? Anyway, the manifesto isn't banned in Canada, though Tarrant's name and words are apparently verboten in our parliament. For Cooper's temerity in voicing his opinion, Conservative leader Andrew Scheer kicked him off the Justice Committee, and he was voluntold, as soldiers put it, to apologize again. Thus did a committee of the federal government rewrite history, just as Winston Smith did for the Ministry of Truth in Orwell's 1984. As Winston reminded himself as he went about his work, quote, "Nor was there any item of news or expression of opinion which conflicted with the needs of the moment, ever allowed to remain on record. All history was a palimpsest, scraped clean and reinscribed exactly as often as was necessary." Or as he said in his more frightened and thus more honest moments, quote, "Your name was removed from the registers, every record of everything you had ever done was wiped out, your one-time existence was denied and then forgotten. You were abolished, annihilated. Vaporized was the usual word. And so perhaps begins that process for Michael Cooper. I cannot tell you how troubling I find this, even though it's the logical result of a whole lot of things I'm old enough to have witnessed firsthand. Perhaps the key thing, because it led to the current importance placed upon feelings, was the development of the victims' rights movement. Have you noticed how many people now rarely say, I think it rained or I think it snowed, but rather, I feel like it rained. I feel like it snowed. Anyway, this began, as so many bad things do, with noble intentions. Long ago, and I've been covering criminal trials since 1978, it is true that victims and their families were sometimes given short shrift by the justice system. Busy prosecutors would forget to tell homicide victims' parents about the accused court dates. Occasionally, relatives couldn't get seats in a crowded courtroom. But these things didn't happen routinely or often. I was there. Generally speaking, no one is more aware of and more sensitive to a victim or a victim's family than a homicide dick. Most of those I know remember the birthdays of all their victims. But in the 80s, there emerged this idea that, as one advocate put it at the time, quote, the politicians long ago recognized the needs of criminals, but they forgot about us. A justice system that doesn't want fair treatment for both sides is not a fair system. Problem is, victims of crime are never meant to be a part or one of the two sides. Justice in this country and in most Western democracies isn't supposed to be a contest between victim and perpetrator, but rather one between state and perpetrator. Thus, it's the state of New York versus Blatchford, or in Canada, Regina versus Blatchford. It's not Blatchford versus the poor SOB she killed. And trust me, I have a list of likely contenders. Of course, the broader societal interests of public safety and protection incorporate the narrower interests of those who have been hurt or damaged by crime. But traditionally, that's where the victim's role began and ended. And that's as it should be, I think. That's what the rule of law at its simplest is. We all agree that we will not seek vengeance and take the law into our own hands. If you burn down my house, I will not burn down yours in retaliation and perhaps rape your wife for good measure. Instead, I will call the cops will investigate, and you may be charged, and at some point you may go on trial. But in 1989, the federal government passed the Victims' Bill of Rights, and over the next decade, this being Canada, and redundancy always the goal, the provinces passed their own versions. What all these bills really did was provide victims with a right to information about court appearances, release dates of offenders, that sort of thing. But before you knew it, there was also the victim impact statement, which is delivered at sentencing and allows a victim or a victim's family to talk publicly about their loss. What these turned out to be were first steps. In May of 1995 came the trial of the serial killer Paul Bernardo. I suppose if I were truly modern, I wouldn't name him either, but I'm not, so I will. I remember that trial like it was yesterday and could talk about it for weeks. But for these purposes, let me just say that it turned the notion of victims being an uninvolved third party on its ear. Bernardo was accused and, of course, convicted of genuinely terrible crimes. He was a serial rapist who moved on to murder with his lovely then-wife, Karla Homolka, at his side. They were co-stars in the deaths of 3 young women, Homolka's own baby sister, Tammy, and teenagers Lasse Mahaffey and Kristen French. Worse, Bernardo was way ahead of his time. Long before Tarrant live-streamed his slaughter in the Christchurch Mosque, well before Luca Magnotta made and posted a video of his killing of the student John Lynn, Bernardo taped his attacks on young girls. It was new, and because it was new, it was especially terrifying. And the first thing that happened was that the trial of Homolka, which went first, was closed to public and to the American press, and subject to so many publication bans, it was essentially held in secret. Then, at Bernardo's trial, the presiding judge, a lovely man named Patrick Lesage, decided at the behest of a lawyer representing the French and Mahaffey families that the public and the press wouldn't be able to see the videotapes, which were the single most critical piece of evidence against Bernardo. This was because the lawyer for the family said, if the tapes were played in public, the families would have to watch them too, and because to play them publicly would violate their daughter's dignity and privacy rights. The families, through their lawyer, Tim Danson, asked for formal intervenor status in the trial, and astonishingly, though the judge said he was doing it as an indulgence and not a right, Lesage granted it to them. Victimhood was also expanded in another way at that trial. Because the videotapes were missed by the cops in their search of the Bernardo Homolka marital home, the government determined it needed Homolka as a witness against her former husband. And fair enough, for a time they did need her, and she was more than happy to oblige. Prosecutors duly lined up an array of shrinks to paint her as a victim of Bernardo herself. Why she was a battered spouse. No, she was a compliant victim of a sexual sadist. No, she had PTSD or traumatic amnesia. 6 months before Bernardo's trial started, the tapes were belatedly found in a clusterfuck that is too complicated to explain here. But those tapes showed Homolka not as a victim, but as Bernardo's accomplice, an eager, lip-licking participant in the sexual assaults of those 3 dead young women and several others, and who on tape seemed as perfectly capable of murder as her darling husband. The tapes showed that Homolka had forgotten about some of the sexual assaults, or perhaps lied about them. At least one police chief and one prosecutor wanted to breach her plea deal because of that, but there was no will to do it at 720 Bay Street, where the Attorney General's big guns work. There, they had all bought into the vision of Carly Curls, as she called herself, as the victim of a very bad man. In fact, Homolka was both participant in the early and middle years of her relationship with Bernardo and their rape and murder spree, and then, in its dying days, but only then, so for about 5 minutes, his victim. Yet her plea deal, 12 years for her involvement in 3 deaths, survived, and after serving every last day of her sentence, she was free. Many people persist in seeing her as a victim, just another sad example of the toxic male. One of those people was the lawyer who represented her while she was still in prison, a Quebec lawyer who really believed in Homolka's victimhood. Sylvie Bordelais was a true believer. That's a lawyer. Years later, I learned that it was Bordelais' brother, Thierry, who married Homolka. And I remember thinking, fine, you like her so much, you have her at your Christmas table every year. And she did. And that remains one of the few threads of justice in the Homolka story. Homolka as victim did untold harm to the idea of gender equality, in my view. If, no matter what a woman does, no matter how heinous her crimes, we persist in seeing her only as the victim of a man, we infantilize her. We aren't granting that she is as capable of the full spectrum of human behavior, good and bad, as are men. So fast forward almost a quarter century, and where are we? Well, to court first. There has been for decades now in all provinces what's called a Victim Witness Assistance Office, or something like it. These are the soothers. They accompany every victim, but particularly in sexual assaults, and guard them like attack dogs. Sam knows all about these people. They're always there, patting shoulders and comforting. They are the handers out of tissues and the dispensers of hugs. This is an actual job. And a victim, which is to say almost always a woman, must of course be supported and believed. Case in point, the sexual assault trial of Jian Ghomeshi, where the 3 main accusers were revealed in cross-examination by our Marie as duplicitous, self-serving complainants with big axes to grind against Mr. Ghomeshi. To varying degrees, they had all said that after they were allegedly attacked by Mr. Ghomeshi, why they were so traumatized they either had nothing to do with him or made sure to see him only in public places where you know they would be safe. This is what they told Toronto police, who had conducted a sleepy I believe type of investigation that would greatly have pleased the #MeToo types, but was in truth a shit show. And it's also what they testified to in court under oath in examination in chief. Alas and alack for them, it turns out that after the alleged attacks, they had variously sent Ghomeshi sexy pictures, or in the case of one, given him a friendly hand job at her house after a dinner out. And by the way, where I grew up, that was considered merely being polite. You think I'm kidding. Or in the case of Lucy Decoutère, actively stalked him for a year, written him an email in which she said, "I want to fuck your brains out," and sent him flowers and a 6-page handwritten love letter in which she said, "I love your hands." You know, the same hands which allegedly had choked and slapped her. Ghomeshi was acquitted properly and rightly, and not on a technicality, whatever that means, and not because his lawyer had played dirty, but because his accusers had revealed themselves as utterly unreliable. They could not be believed. And yet, it was as if the verdict didn't matter, as though it hadn't happened. The very same day, verdict day, women marched in 2 Canadian cities, Ottawa and Toronto, in support of their 3 sisters. On social media and in the mainstream press, people who had never come within a hair of that courtroom confidently raged against the verdict and the rebirth of old rape myths. Inspector Joan McKenna, then the head of criminal investigations for the Ottawa force, tweeted a picture of 6 unidentified women and the line, #WeBelieve, #self-care at Ottawa Police, and #end the stigma. That tweet was duly retweeted by the chief of Ottawa Police, Charles Bordelot. The chief of a major police force is an adherent of believing women no matter what, even after they have been demonstrably revealed as untruthful. Then NDP leader Tom Mulcair tweeted on verdict day, quote, "Today and every day, #I believe survivors." Ghomeshi was still called a rapist and still is to this day. And the complainants themselves carried on as though nothing had happened. They continued to describe themselves as survivors and do to this day. Are you fucking kidding me? What survivors? How do you survive a thing which didn't happen? Ghomeshi, vilified and unemployable as he remains 3 years after the verdict, was one of the lucky ones. The allegations against him went to court, where they were actually tested and found woefully lacking. Consider the other men of #MeToo, most of whom had no such opportunity. John Furlong, the former boss of the 2010 Vancouver Olympics. Former Liberal MPs Massimo Pichetti and Scott Andrews, whose political careers and reputations were ruined by allegations of serious personal misconduct, whatever that is. Politicians Patrick Brown, Kent Hurd, Tony Clement, and Rick Dykstra. CTV reporter Paul Bliss, who has simply disappeared. The brilliant writer Stephen Galloway and the impeccable TV host Steve Paikin, falsely accused by former perennial candidate Sarah Thompson. Those are just the names I can remember off the top of my head, and what they have in common is that none of them had anything close to due process. None of them had the chance John Ghomeshi had. The allegations against them were handled by private investigations, most of which were kept secret. Some of them never even learned what the allegations were. Aaron Weir, for God's sakes, was exiled from the federal NDP for being, and I'm not kidding, a close talker, as they used to call it on the old Seinfeld show. Yet they were done in, and in some cases vaporized, as Winston Smith put it. What else can you call it when one of those who simply gave Ghomeshi a chance was fired? That's what happened to Ian Baruma, who was, until he dared to publish an essay by Ghomeshi, the editor of the New York Review of Books. Baruma's job was to publish essays. Then he published Ghameshi's. Then he had no job. It was no longer enough for social media to denounce Ghameshi, who, let us remember, was acquitted, or to denounce his enablers, as they are called. Now, those who would give him a voice or a platform must be mobbed too. Of course, a good part of the population, those of you in pants, can't really say anything about #MeToo. Men have been pretty much silenced on this subject, and if they do want to speak, they first have to check their various privileges, their maleness, their whiteness if they're white, their heterosexuality if they're that, and of course the collective entitlements granted them because of the all-pervasive patriarchy. Honest to God, shoot me now. Can I just say what a whole lot of horse manure I think all that is? It's like the popular need women apparently have to feel safe, which I find utterly astonishing. I've worked with men all my life, often wildly outnumbered by them, as when I was one of a half-dozen female sports writers in North America, and I can honestly never remember ever fretting or thinking about my safety. Anyway, I have a voice because I have breasts, and they're real and they're spectacular. So even though I've been deemed a rape apologist for saying what I think, at least I'm able to say it. Ghameshi really was the lucky one, even though in his case, going into his trial, he was not cloaked by the presumption of innocence, as judges like to say. He'd already been tried, convicted, and hanged on social media and in much of the old school press as well. Even I was a paragon of neutrality compared to most of the people in that courtroom, had gone into the trial rather expecting to be convinced of Ghameshi's guilt. What happened was just the opposite. For anyone who was remotely paying attention, it was the presumption of guilt which was being displaced at that trial, or because it was Henein, and Henein is nothing less than magnificent, dispatched. Certainly, Ghameshi is luckier than Patrick Witt, who as a 22-year-old undergrad at Yale had an informal complaint filed against him by his ex-girlfriend with the then brand new university-wide Committee on Sexual Misconduct. We all know from the Lindsay Shepherd story at Laurier what bastions of fairness and freedom universities and their committees are. First, Witt was summoned to a sort of mediation. He asked to bring a lawyer, but was told he couldn't. He asked that fact-finding be done so he could clear his name, but was told, there's nothing to clear your name of. He demanded a formal complaint be lodged, but was told he couldn't initiate it, only his accuser could. And guess what? She didn't want to. And guess what? Somehow, despite the confidentiality that was supposed to surround this Kafkaesque process, word leaked out. Witt lost his chance at a Rhodes Scholarship, where he'd just been announced as a finalist. He'd been Yale's starting quarterback and had been invited to the National Football League Combine, an annual invitation-only showcase for the best college players in the United States. And guess what? He was uninvited. And guess what? The New York Times somehow learned of the complaint against him and ran a story. 4 years later, Witt was a student at Harvard Law School, which had just adopted a similar policy to Yale's. A bunch of law school professors were protesting the new policy. Witt wrote, quote, "If considered in the abstract, many might wonder how a policy with such a laudable aim could draw any serious objections. And I might well have been among them, were it not for the fact that such a policy nearly ruined my life. The complaint launched against me caused me and my family immense grief, and as a simple Google search of my name reveals, its malignant effects have not abated. It cost me my reputation and credibility, the opportunity to become a Rhodes Scholar, the full-time job offer I'd worked so hard to attain, and the opportunity to achieve my childhood dream of playing in the NFL. I have had to address it with every prospective employer whom I've contacted, with every girl I've dated since, and even with Harvard Law School during my admission interview. He ended the piece with this, quote, "The reader might note that I have yet to even address the question of whether I was innocent of the accusation. I was. But it does not come up at any point above for the same reason that it never came up in any of the actions taken against me. Because by the nature of the proceedings that follow from these new policies, it simply doesn't matter." It didn't matter either, as it turned out, for Ghomeshi. The narrative went like this. The complaining women had been abused by a callous system. The deck was stacked against them. They hadn't been colluding, heavens no, just merely talking, as chicks do. They were just simple women who had been deeply wronged. For the record, the Ghomeshi accusers were 41, 33, and 32 years old, respectively, back then. Ducouter was a pretty successful actor and an Air Force captain in the military. Number 1, the oldest, was a once married mother. Number 3 was in the arts. They'd each been around the proverbial block a time or two. None of the facts, most important of which was Ghomeshi's acquittal, seemed to matter in the court of public opinion. After all, went the mantra, he was a well-known creep. And now, because, as Justin Trudeau might say, it's 2019, we have new amendments to the criminal code, which give complainants in sexual assault trials the automatic right to have counsel and to get standing in arguments about whether they can be questioned about their previous sexual history. Automatic rights to a lawyer and standing. That's a long way from the indulgence Pat Lesage granted the victims' families in the Bernardo trial all those years ago. Sexual assault trials across the country are on hold for months as these issues involving what are third parties are worked out. In the trial of former Afghan captive Joshua Boyle, for example, the trial has already been sidelined for 2 months so his former wife's lawyer could appeal the judge's ruling that the ex-wife could be asked a few questions about the couple's previous sexual history. Just last week, the former wife's lawyer lost in court, but that decision too can be appealed. The estranged wife, by the way, Caitlin Coleman, testified via video from a different room, the so-called kiddie room, so she could feel safe and supported, a practice that used to be reserved for children of tender years testifying against their parents or abusers. In another case between former spouses, where the defense has launched a constitutional challenge against the new amendments, the wife testified with a support dog with her in the witness box. Now, I'm a dog person, but I draw the line there. We all talk a lot about the erosion of freedoms on campus, the lack of free expression on social media. These are charter rights and worthy subjects. But the most important rights we have are those we need when we're charged with a crime and face the ultimate loss of freedom, jail. Those are the rights to a fair trial within a reasonable time, to be informed of the charges against you, not to be denied bail without reasonable cause, and Doug Ford is now doing his best to upset that apple wagon, and the right to be presumed innocence. These rights and freedoms don't exist anywhere else but in court, so we should pay attention when they're in danger of being eroded. Thank you for your time, and again, thank you for the award.
Your remarks tonight, thank you very much. That was brilliant and insightful. It could have gone on much longer, and I would have been equally attentive. So the kind of work that you do in journalism in Canada is fairly unique, and I personally have heard it said from a high legal authority, who must remain nameless, that, quote, "No journalist knows more about the Canadian justice system than you do. And this requires a single-minded dedication. And so have you reflected on what motives you do to work in this field, and where do you find your source of inspiration?"
My motives are only to tell a good story.
A little closer.
The courts are filled with good stories. As Sam will tell you, where's Sam? He's gone now, he's fled. As Sam would tell you also, though, we never get bored in court. There's no, or very few arguments that are so arcane that it isn't interesting. It's like going into court is like going to a wedding, you know. People divide themselves into two sides. There's the victim side on that side, the accused side on that side, and the drama plays out brilliantly. So that's it.
Some people in the present culture expect that you should have a particular perspective on issues because you're a female professional. What do you say to those who think you have betrayed the feminist cause?
I don't think I have. I certainly consider myself a feminist. I'm pro-choice, pro-equity rights, all of that. But I think that sometimes, you know, there are examples where people have suffered. I think of Linda Gibbons, who's a pro-life protester. I always get the jargon mixed up. Who basically just used to walk in front of an abortion clinic with a small sign. She wasn't one of the people who accosted women going into the clinic, etc. And she's done a total of 11 years in jail, which I find astonishing because all she was ever doing was, you know, exercising her freedom of expression rights. But anyway, so I don't have to defend myself, I don't think.
The Linda Gibbons is, I remember reading your column about that, and it was, I just appreciate somebody who grasps freedom of expression, which a lot of people just don't get. And, you know, I appreciate the fact you're pro-choice and you realize that there's an injustice here with somebody being locked up in jail. I want to recognize a lawyer who's done a lot of work, as far as I know, almost all of it or all of it on a pro bono basis, who's worked for Linda Gibbons' free expression rights. Daniel Santoro, can you stand up?
Oh yeah, he's here.
Daniel. Thank you, Daniel. So one of the strong threads in your work and in your columns is respect for individual liberty and the rule of law. Is there a story or a case that really stands out the most when it comes to defending these important values?
I guess probably the best big case that I would, it's not individual liberty as much as it was a collective failure, was in Caledonia, where the Ontario Provincial Police policed so badly. They wanted to be good cops, but they were under marching orders that I could never definitively prove, but I believe came close to proving were marching orders from the government, just not to arrest people, to arrest Native offenders. So anyway, that's probably the biggest case. I can't think of any others.
There's a question here that I'll read out, and it actually ties in with a question I was about to ask, so I'll ask you both. Advice for a reporter starting out on how to maintain honesty against pressure to toe the line. And then my own question, and as you know, about 9 months ago, I went through kind of a Twitter mobbing. I made a speech in Calgary. Some of the remarks were completely mischaracterized and subjected to a lot of attacks, and I know that you have as well. And so to what extent has it impacted you to be attacked on Twitter, the Twitter mob, internet, and what do you do to keep going?
Everybody gets attacked on Twitter. I use Twitter to post dog pictures primarily, so I think that's a good use of Twitter. The first day that my newspaper, I forget where I was working at the time, might have been the Post, might have been the Globe, started to run readers' comments at the bottom. I read the first couple, realized I was in danger of losing any semblance of an IQ I had left, and stopped reading them. So I don't read them. I don't spend much time on social media because, as everyone who has done so knows, if you do, you will fuck up at some point, and then everybody will beat you up. So it's not worth it.
Not worth it. Okay. Good answer. Thank you.
Post dog pictures.
Post dog pictures. There we go. Question from a member of the audience. We are an old crowd, and we get it. But many young people, freedom or liberty is abstract and probably seen as a permanent condition. How do we get our message to them?
I think all of us, when we're young, are stupid. Most people aren't Lindsay Shepherd. At that age, most of us are dopey, and I think all you got to do is wait for people to grow up and realize what matters. I don't remember being a particular defender of freedoms when I was in my 20s. I was mostly in the pub, so.
Okay, 2 questions on this one card. The second one puts you in a direct conflict of interest with your employer. I know you won't mind. Kristy, is court reporting as a profession dying? And second question, what do you think of the government subsidy of the press? I take it that's an allusion to the federal government package.
I don't think court reporting is dying any more than journalism is dying. So yes, court reporting is dying, but that's because newspapers are dying. But my particular branch of it is in no more or less danger than any other branch. And I am completely against any sort of government subsidy for newspapers. There's a very simple answer to leveling the playing field. The CBC, which we all subsidize to, I think, almost $1 billion, is increasingly diverting those public dollars and the subsidy to its online arm. And the online arm is the direct competitor to the newspaper because we all exist online. So instead of subsidizing everybody else, just stop subsidizing. I think, for the record, I mean stop subsidizing CBC online. I hardly watch TV anymore. And the only time I ever listen to CBC radio is when I'm coming back from a long road trip and I've had it up to here with some of the radio in the States, so I listen to CBC then and sort of feel a brief moment of welcome. And the only time I ever listened to it regularly was when I was covering a trial in Kingston, Ontario, the Shafia trial, and I used to fall asleep to a repeat of Ghameshi's program, whatever it was called, I can't remember now. I'd never met him at that point, and I thought it was brilliant because I would hear his voice and I would nod off. It was fabulous. It's like a narcoleptic thing.
In terms of, what are the greatest threats, in your view, what are the greatest threats to the free society, whether it's a person, group, organization, party, movement, trend, ideology, what have you? What do you see as the greatest threats to the free society?
Oh boy, that's a big question. I still think that what happens in the courts is most important because that's where if we're lucky, we get to defend ourselves someday. So I'm concerned about the increasing cuts to legal aid, and I'm concerned about the difficulty in getting bail, which the current provincial government has recently enacted. The people who don't get bail generally are already the poorest and the blackest and the weirdest and the unluckiest. So those are things I care about. I think that's a threat to a free society if people are going to jail when they're still presumed to be innocent. So I care about that. And I think Me Too, #MeToo, is a genuine threat to what I would consider to be actual equality rights.
Thank you. There appear to be some moves to push for the reintroduction of the infamous Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act, which is the section that Mark Steyn and Maclean's Magazine and so on, and many people have been prosecuted under. What do you think about reintroducing Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act?
I've covered a couple of Human Rights Commission hearings. I found them unbearably unfair, actually, and tedious to boot, and expensive. So I'm not a big fan of the genre. So I wouldn't want to see any expansion or going back to giving human rights tribunals any more powers than they have. I mean.
I've only got one free hand, so I can't clap to that. What are the qualities you see in the best lawyers, and what are the qualities you see in the worst ones?
I think it's probably true of every profession. The best lawyers are the hardest workers. I can tell you that in the Mark Norman trial that we recently covered, Marie and her partner, Christine Mainville, who is also here somewhere tonight, she's the sort of baby Marie. She's a fabulous lawyer. They knew that file so much better than anyone else, except the judge, who also knew the file every bit as well. The judge was a fantastic judge. I loved her. The prosecutors and the Justice Department lawyers, not so much. They got their clocks cleaned. So the answer is always work harder. It's whether you're a lawyer, I think, or a journalist or anything else. Just outwork the son of a bitch.
Hard work, all right. Absolutely true. We've got Justice Center. I can't help myself. The Justice Center now has 3 full-time lawyers and 2 part-time lawyers, and they all work very, very hard. And it's a key ingredient. Christy, from your sports career, was there an inspiring story that stays with you, or what, and what, if anything, still bothers you?
What, if anything, still bothers me?
I think so.
Okay.
I'm really reading questions from the audience. So it's, some of them might be doctors or something. The handwriting's not that great, perhaps.
I guess my favorite sports story now is the Raptors.
Hear, hear.
I think that they are, I have not been a basketball fan for a very long time, and I got so excited by them. I immediately wanted to go and write basketball, and might try and do it sometimes because you sit courtside, I think, if you're a reporter. So that's very cool. And I loved how those guys, those Raptors, conducted themselves. I thought they were graceful and intelligent and kind to each other. So I love the fucking team.
So we have 2 that they're quite political, but and coming uncensored from the audience. What do you think of the tendency of people to vote against a political party out of fear rather than for a party they believe in but worry might not win?
Well, I'm trying to imagine how anybody is going to vote in the next federal election, or in 3 years, I guess, in the next provincial election. I mean, we're not blessed with a great number of choices, in my view. I'm not going to vote for Justin Trudeau. I'm not going to vote for Andrew Scheer. I like Max Bernier just because he's an outlier, but he's a bit of a one-trick pony. I can't vote for Elizabeth May. You know, I don't know how does anybody decide to vote when the choices are so lousy?
No argument for me there. Another one, these are unplanned and unscripted. What do you think is the most likely? What do you think is the most likely leader of a federal party to help defend freedom of speech?
None of the above. I mean, it's not going to be Scheer. He just kicked Michael Cooper out for saying something inappropriate in a committee. It's not going to be Trudeau, who kicked Jody Wilson-Raybould and, God, now I can't remember her name, you know who I mean, Jane Philpott out. It's not going to be the NDP, who still won't let Aaron Weir, the close talker, back in the caucus. Who's it going to be? Who's going to defend freedom of speech?
The Michael Cooper incident was interesting. The excuse me, the column in the Post-Millennial that talked about the oppression Olympics, because you've got a scenario where the gentleman you referred to, Mr. Suri of the Alberta Muslim Public Affairs Council, felt deeply offended by Michael Cooper's comment, but Michael Cooper felt deeply offended by Mr. Suri's comment. And who felt the most offended? Well, you don't know, I don't know, nobody knows who felt the most offended. Yet in the oppression Olympics, it's pretty clear who's gonna win that one.
It reminds me of, there was a story in the paper. I'm on leave this summer, so I haven't followed it so much, but there was a professor at a Canadian university who insisted on eating lunch in his class, and one of his students is a woman who has multiple allergies and suffers anaphylactic shock if she even hears the word peanut or whatever. And she asked him to stop eating, or the professor to stop eating in class, and the professor has some equally awful disease that requires him to eat in class. And that's your real life oppression Olympics, right?
I guess we'd have to delve into the race and the gender and the religion and the sexual orientation of the two parties, and that might be helpful in resolving it. The formal part of our evening is coming to a close, and but my understanding is the bar is open, and we have this place until some late hour, much later than right now. So do not feel obligated to rush off. And I remind everybody, there's a form on the table. We want your email address if you want to get our newsletter. We want your feedback on this dinner, what you liked, what you disliked, whatever, for the dinner next year, June the 15th, 2020. And of course, if you're not already on board as a donor, please consider that. And again, I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to especially thank Christy for the fantastic work that you do. You are an inspiration to me. I delight in reading her columns. I've been doing it for, this is the first time I'm meeting her in person, in fact, today, so in the flesh. And so I appreciate the work that you're doing to preserve the free society and to pursue truth and proclaim truth. Please keep up your good work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. None of these events can ever be done by one person. So I would like to express my gratitude to the staff here at the Eglinton Grand. To John Carpe, my boss, and several of my colleagues whom I will name, Giordano Berti, Michelle Gusdal, Mike Kennedy, Krista Malti, Lindsay Shepard, and our volunteers, Ellen, Liam, Jesse, Braden, and Priyank. So on behalf of all of us at JCCF, our board of directors, our president, we thank you very much for being with us tonight. We hope you have enjoyed the program, and we do hope to see you next year on June 15th. So once again, thank you very much, and good night.